Breakdown groaned quietly as his optic slowly opened, colors bleeding through the darkness. His helm hurt, and he couldn't piece together what happened before he fell into recharge. Or was he drugged? He couldn't remember. He slowly tried to raise his helm, only for it to fall back down. He tried to ask out loud what had happened, but the only thing that came from his lips were garbled slurs. "You're up!" The blue van made a tiny noise as he heard that voice. It was familiar, but he couldn't put a finger as to why. He tried to raise his head one more time, succeeding, and his golden optic met black and red. Knockout? His vision gradually sharpened, the familiar red paint job of the Decepticon medic forming into the veined mech. Breakdown realized that he was sitting at a table, Knockout sitting opposite him with his helm in his hand. A lazy smile graced his face, his optic half-lidded. "Glad you're here, Breakdown," he responded. "I was thinking for a moment that I put a little too much sedative into your energon, but I obviously haven't. Where?" Breakdown tried to talk again. His mind was still foggy, and he couldn't fully piece together what was going on. "You mean you don't remember? That really hurts, you know." Knockout stood up and walked to the side of the room. "We talked about this, remember?" Breakdown followed the other's movements and noticed that there was a long rectangular table, 4 bumps covered with a dark blood-red cloth. "We did?" The medic chuckled, shaking his helm. "Oh, you. I guess I should remind you then." He turned his optics back to the armored van, an almost unnerving smile on his lips. "We're having that date, remember now?" Breakdown blinked. A date? What in the pit was he talking about? Before he could ask any further, the Aston Martin pulled the cloth off and revealed 4 covered dishes. How strange. "We had a talk a few cycles ago, and I said that we needed to talk more, and you said, 'Sounds good to me.' So here we are, and I made you dinner. Now wasn't that nice of me?" The larger tried to move, only for his arms and legs to barely budge. He looked down and realized why. His wrists, ankles, forearms, and legs were strapped to the chair he was in. He tried to thrash around in his binds in the hopes of breaking free, but to no avail. "Settle down! I could just crush your peds and servos and slash your joints if you prefer," Knockout snapped. He quickly calmed down and grabbed the first dish. "Oh, I'm sorry, honey. I shouldn't have said that. Now, how about we settle down and start eating? I made it myself, and I hope you enjoy it." The red medic walked back over to the table and placed the dish in front of Breakdown. "Firstly, we'll start off with an aperitif and hors d'oeuvres." With a flourish, the Aston Martin pulled off the lid and revealed what was underneath. A slim glass filled almost to the brim with a lurid purple liquid that was faintly glowing. Set next to it was a small dish with 6 tiny round objects. Breakdown couldn't tell what they were, but when he saw the colors, his tanks churned with dread. Optics. Knockout only smiled. "So we begin the meal with what I call a bloody Megatron, taken straight from our Lord and Master's veins. And on the side we have optics from him, Starscream, and Soundwave. You won't believe how hard it was getting them." He placed the lid on the table and held up an optic, Starscream's, and rolled it between his fingers. "Now then, as it's said on Earth, bon appetit." With no further preamble, the smaller mech popped the optic in his mouth and chewed. He made a few contemplative hums before laying out a quiet in delight. He swallowed. "That was great. You should try." He picked up another optic from the dish, this time belonging to Megatron, and held it to Breakdown's lips. "Open up. You'll love it." The ex-Stunticon looked away, clenching his denta together. This couldn't be happening. It just couldn't! However, Knockout was persistent and tried to force the optic into Breakdown's mouth. The van kept on resisting, and the medic tried a more hands-on approach. He grabbed the other's red face and pried his mouth open, shoving the tiny ball into his mouth. "Now chew thoroughly," he crooned. His hand clamped over Breakdown's mouth, leaving the larger unable to spit out the optic. Seeing no other option, Breakdown reluctantly began chewing. It was disgusting. The tiny components cracked underneath his denta, and a small bit of optical fluid ran across his tongue. Eventually, after what felt more like a lifetime than a few clicks, Breakdown finally swallowed, shivering as the vile mess slid down his throat. Knockout pulled his hand away and smiled, picking up the glass of Megatron's blood. "Now how about a drink to wash that down with?" He held the glass up to Breakdown's lips and nudged the rim of the glass against them. "I'm sure you'll enjoy it. It will certainly help prepare you for the next few courses." The medic wrenched open the van's mouth again, pouring the vile liquid into his mouth, ignoring the disgusted whines. It tasted so bitter against his tongue, leaving behind a foul aftertaste as it flowed down his throat, and a few drops trickled down his chin. The glass was pulled away, leaving behind only a few droplets of the substance, which Knockout swiftly downed. "There, now we can move on to the starter." The now empty glass was placed back onto the dish, and Knockout carried it off to the side, instead picking up the second covered dish and placed it in front of Breakdown. "Oops, nearly forgot the utensils. Silly me," Knockout purred, pulling a knife and fork out of his subspace. Breakdown also found this strange. They normally only had energon as food, and if they had anything else, it was normally eaten using their fingers. Before he could ask about it, the lid for the dish was pulled off, and Breakdown fought the urge to throw up what was now settled in its tanks. The dish had dark gray and purple fingers scattered around, along with small fragments of violet and silver metal and a gray tongue. It was all topped off with a thin blue liquid and iron filings. "Now for the starter, we have a servos and tongue salad, with a Viacon vinaigrette and iron filings. You know, the fingers came from both Starscream and some hapless Viacon designated ST-3V3, who also donated some of the energon from his body to make the vinaigrette. But the tongue is fresh from Starscream's lying little mouth, with some seasoning, of course." Knockout pierced the tongue with the fork, bringing it up to Breakdown's mouth. "Oh well, at least we won't be able to have him whining anymore." "Knockout!" Breakdown couldn't continue as the tongue was shoved into his mouth, cutting off his words. The ex-Stunticon desperately wanted to spit out the offending object, but Knockout had placed his other hand behind Breakdown's helm, keeping him still. "Come on, Break. I made the entire meal just for you. I just want you to try my food. Do you not like it?" The medic's tone had shifted. Even though he sounded morose and insulted, there was still an edge that promised pain if the wrong thing was said. "Damn it, Breakdown! Try it!" The van's lone optic widened at the sudden outburst, watching as the smaller mech's mouth twisted into a snarl. He was stuck. Either eat the second-in-command's tongue, or risk getting tortured by Knockout, his closest friend for many Vorns. He started chewing, the fork leaving his mouth and letting the tongue remain. Breakdown chewed, feeling the appendage being torn apart by his denta, infuriating his gag reflex. The texture was slimy, and there was a tang of acidic energon, no doubt from that vinaigrette that the medic mentioned. It was warm, but still had an underlying coldness to it. He could also taste a variety of spices that could only take his mind off of the fact that he was eating Starscream's tongue for so long. "Primus, what have you done to deserve this?" Breakdown swallowed, shuddering in disgust. His optic looked upwards at Knockout, who had that Primus-forsaken smile again. The Aston Martin stabbed a few of the fingers and a fragment of silver metal, holding it up. "You know, the metal I got from the Viacon's chassis and Starscream's wings. I tried some beforehand. It is just divine with the vinaigrette and filings. I'm sure you'll agree with me." Seeing no way out of this, the larger Decepticon shakily opened his mouth, allowing his partner to shove the forkful in. He quickly chewed, trying to ignore the taste and the feeling of crunching metal and energon trickling down his chin. "Now that wasn't so hard, was it?" the medic cooed, spearing another forkful for himself, chuckling and purring in delight as he ate. "How about we move to the main course?" "Why?" Breakdown wanted to scream. "Why are you doing this? What have I done?" But he held his tongue. One wrong word could mean excruciating pain for him. Knockout hummed to himself as he put the starter back to its original place, taking the third dish over to the table. He pulled the lid off and seemed to have been ignorant of Breakdown's gagging. Laserbeak sat on the dish, charred, lifeless, and settled in a dark blue puddle of energon. Coiling around the drone were tentacles, which the van recognized as belonging to Soundwave. To top it all off, a few dark, sharp pieces of metal and tiny spools of thin cables were scattered around the plate, as if trying to make the monstrosity look like a piece of art. For our main, we have roast Laserbeak with cable garnish. You really hated Soundwave, didn't you? The fact that he spied on us all the time with that pest Laserbeak? Don't worry, neither of them will bother you anymore, Knockout purred, leaning into the side of Breakdown's neck and nuzzled the cables there. He pulled away with a smile and a sigh. I'm sure you'll enjoy this. The medic stabbed one of the Soundwave's cables. He picked up the knife and with his usual methodical skill, slowly cut a thin slice of the cable and held it up to Breakdown once more. I didn't try any of this since I was saving it for you, so you'll have to tell me what you think. Knockout watched the larger con raptly, waiting for a reaction. The van opened his mouth and didn't wince as the tentacle piece was shoved in unceremoniously, forcing him to start chewing. So, what do you think? Is it good? Breakdown nodded. I'm glad you like it. The smaller mech practically chirped, looking more like a sparkling who'd been praised for a high mark in a test. Let me try some. With that, he took a piece of the tentacle for himself and consumed it voraciously, humming in delight over the taste. It truly does taste divine. You know, next time I do this, you can be taste tester. No, no, no! The ex-Stunticon could only pray that this whole ordeal was a nightmare, and that he would wake up soon. He couldn't possibly be here. He couldn't possibly be being force-fed to other Decepticons. And this couldn't possibly be Knockout. He didn't even notice they'd started crying until the Aston Martin stroked his cheek. What's the matter? Don't cry. Tell me what's wrong, the narcissist asked, his tone shifting once again, this time sounding genuinely concerned and sympathetic. Don't worry. I'll make you feel better. I promise. We could just finish eating, and then we could do whatever you like, okay? Van nodded again. Knockout stabbed the tip of Laserbeak's left wing, cutting off a sizable portion with a knife and holding it up. Breakdown couldn't help but look at the energon dripping off the piece, and once again made no protest as it was put into his mouth. He chewed and swallowed as quickly as he could, hoping that this would all be over quickly, and he'd wake up in his berth, and the others would still be alive, and he would go racing with Knockout and fight Bulkhead and...